Autumn, welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk with you. You've been through so much. You have struggled with things like depression, even struggles with suicide or ideation, at least. You have struggled a lot in relationships you've shared, whether it's your relationship with your parents or romantic relationships, but you didn't let that crush you. You worked through so many things. You're in a better spot today. And I'm so excited to see kind of how you went from where you were to where you are today. But starting out, I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning. You were 14 years old when your parents shared the news that they were getting divorced, but you weren't surprised. Why weren't you surprised? And what led your family to that position of your parents getting divorced?
I wasn't surprised because the tension in my house was very palpable. My parents were speaking to each other, but weren't hugging, weren't kissing, showing any sorts of affection. And my father was sleeping upstairs in the guest room. And I remember asking my mother why, and she said, well, he gets up early on the weekends he was training for triathlons at the time. So he gets up really early on the weekends. I don't want to get woken up. And I just didn't buy that. I think I was a little too old to buy that line. So that was kind of the first inclination. And then I actually met the woman he was cheating with. And so when my mom broke the news to me that my father had committed adultery, I immediately said, oh, it's this woman. And I pulled up the picture of her because he introduced us to her, and I said, it's her. So I think on some subliminal level, I knew that their relationship was a little more than friendly. So I didn't know the real start of the story was when my brother was just born. So this was about 2006. My father had previously committed adultery with his secretary at his workplace. And I did not know about that affair, but my mother forgave him for that affair and they moved on. But there was just a pattern of infidelity in the relationship. And my mother and father tried to work things out, but there just didn't seem to be any road to reconciliation. So that was when they decided to divorce.
And there was a point at which you realized that the infidelity that you saw, with your dad didn't start with your parents. There were signs of it in previous generations. Take me to that moment when you kind of realized, man, this goes deeper than just my parents' marriage.
I think that the fact that on the grandparent level, there had been cheating as well. My dad's dad cheated on his wife when he was in the military and even left the family for a few, maybe not a year, but a couple months. So my dad had seen that and unfortunately fell into that pattern, but it also was on my mother's side as well. Her grandmother was cheated on repeatedly by her grandfather. And so it kind of ran through both sides. So thankfully, my mom was very open about our past, and it wasn't like a shameful thing. It was, these people made mistakes, but they're still our ancestors. So I did know about that. And I think that helped me kind of cope a little bit, knowing that, it's easy to fall into this sin. And my dad did not get the best example growing up. He didn't see a faithful relationship. So without having that example, it was hard for him to replicate it in his own marriage.
And when did your mom share that news about your grandparents? I'm curious.
I can't remember a time not knowing. I think I was always kind of curious about people I never met. And so I just asked all sorts of questions, and she was always very open with me and not judgmental, but just letting me into the fact that there were good things about our ancestors and bad things, and these were some of the bad things.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like like you said, you were curious, and it wasn't this thing where she was kind of like sharing it with you that overwhelmed you. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I've heard kind of the opposite side of the story. That's why I was asking where, parents end up sharing and dumping, which I know we'll get to a little bit later, but dumping maybe information that kids don't really need to know, at least not at that point in their life. And so I'm glad to hear that, at least given this topic, it was done in a way that wasn't overwhelming to you.
Yes. That came later, the dumping, unfortunately.
We're going to get into. But on this note of infidelity, I'm curious, how did, the past infidelity with grandparents and specifically your father's cheating impact how you viewed men, love, relationships, and especially this idea of like being faithful?
It seemed unattainable to me. Most of my friends, it seemed at the time, looking back, I know this wasn't the case, but it seemed like everyone's parents I knew were breaking up, getting divorced, having all sorts of issues. So I just thought that this wasn't possible for me. Like it was in my blood somehow that I couldn't be faithful. So that was really, really tough to kind of get over that fear and realize that the cycle could stop with me. And it doesn't have to be a generational thing that is like in my DNA or something like that. So
It sounds like you've wrestled with that a bit. I'm curious. I've dealt with similar questions, and I'm curious, was there a specific moment when you kind of came to that realization that, this doesn't have to be me? In my story, there's certainly that fear, right? And I hear this with a lot of people like us. It's like, we're really afraid of repeating our parents' story because we've seen that. We've seen, kind of like with your grandparents, it started there, it went to your parents, not blaming them, but there's certainly this trend that you see that's hard to ignore. And so, yeah, I'm curious if there was a specific moment where you kind of realized like, no, this doesn't have to be me.
I think in preparing to be married to my now husband, a lot of these fears came up, especially in like the engagement and pre-engagement period. I think I had to just honestly take a leap of faith and recognize that he came, like, look at the objective facts. He came from a good whole family where there was no divorce present. That was healing for me to at least have one of us have a whole family. So I saw a good example of marriage from his parents. I had many examples of good marriages around me. So I knew it was theoretically possible, even if it wasn't for my parents. And I think the knowledge that helped me the most actually is that my parents were frankly just incompatible with each other and both had very traumatic upbringings. And in comparison, my upbringing was more positive, not saying there was nothing bad, but more positive. So I had just better tools to use to resolve conflicts. And that, coupled with the good examples that I saw, coupled with just God, having Catholicism in my life and having the Blessed Sacrament and confession and just having the tools to be a good partner, I think helped me take the leap and get married.
No, I love that. I felt similar in a lot of ways. Like looking back at my parents, I love my parents, and I know they would admit that there were mistakes that they made. I clearly see that, but still love them, of course. And in a lot of ways, I've come to this place of compassion where it's like, man, they had to do so much with so little. And I feel like, it sounds like we're the same in that we were given so much. We had people in our lives, especially for me, and we'll get to this in your story, like mentors and people who kind of stepped in to fill those roles, maybe where mom and dad didn't quite live up to what I needed. And so it's like looking back, it almost feels unfair. It's like I've been so blessed. There's been so much good given me. Do you feel the same?
I think it is kind of unfair to expect a perfect marriage from two people who grow up in very broken homes and they grew up almost in a cult. That's a whole nother story, but that whole situation was super damaging to them. I just can't imagine. So I try to imagine my parents as the ages that I see them as, which is teenagers. There were certain events in their life that didn't let them move past that. So when I think of my mom as a teenager who's struggling and has abusive parents, and my dad and his situation with his mom leaning on him emotionally, it was just a mess on both accounts. So I try to think of them as teenagers, and that helps me to have a lot of compassion for them.
That's a good tactic. And as you know, but for everyone listening, that's one of the effects of trauma. It can literally keep you like stuck developmentally in the past, or at least when you're triggered in certain ways, you literally act as like an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old or whatever age you might be kind of forced back into. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. But I'm curious, was there anything else specifically in your view of maybe men that kind of bled from your dad's behavior into your relationships?
I thought that every fight would end in the dissolution of the relationship. So I put up and shut up. I let one partner kind of take advantage of me because I thought that's what you had to do to be liked and stay in the relationship. So I kind of modeled what my mom had to do to keep the relationship together, if that makes sense. And I couldn't have a voice because my mom didn't have a voice. And at the same time, this resentment of men just was simmering under the surface. They're not faithful. They can't be faithful. Is it even worth it? Like, is marriage worth it? I don't even want to have kids. It just all felt like too much of a risk because men seemed so, wishy-washy, and like you couldn't depend on them because I couldn't depend on my dad. So that was kind of the underlying belief under all of that angst.
Yeah. And it's true in some situations like you experienced with your dad. And, sadly in our culture, it's like a really common thing for men to be exactly what you described. But I'm really curious. So you ended up with a guy at one point who really mimicked your dad in so many ways. I remember in the article I read, you said Freud would be proud.
Freud would be proud.
So just kind of recreating that same environment relationship that you had, with your father. But you didn't stay there, which I really admire. I'm curious, like you came to a point where like, I need to break up with this guy. This needs to end. I'm curious, like what changed in you, and maybe take us to that moment when you're like, this has to stop.
I think COVID was a point for a lot of people to figure out what they needed to change in their life. For us, I was under the sad delusion that people who disagreed on very fundamental issues and beliefs could still make it work in a relationship. And so we disagreed about very, very many things. At that time, I was still an agnostic, so we should have, on paper, worked well together. But at a certain point in about April 2020, I realized our beliefs about this pandemic and really everything are completely different and they cannot be reconciled. And I just had this one little thought in my head of, I want to raise my children into faith. And I was agnostic, so that makes no sense. But I think I wanted my children to have a structure, even if I didn't believe in that structure. So that was a non-starter with this particular boyfriend. So that was it. That's
Okay.
the breaking
So
point.
I'm curious, was there a point ever in your relationships where you were just like, you mentioned this a little bit before, but you were just like, why even try? Like, I'm not even going to go down the route of love and marriage. I'm not even going to, you said you didn't even want kids at one point. Yeah. Like, tell me a little bit about that experience and how you came around to the point of like, no, I think this might be worth it.
After that relationship dissolved, I had resigned myself to be a cat lady for like the rest of my life. It was very dramatic.
I'm sure you would make a great cat lady.
I was 20. I mean, there was no reason to be this dramatic, but I was ready for it to be over because I was like, that was a year and a half of my life. Like, I can't, and my judgment's so bad. Like, I couldn't trust my own judgment. I felt like if I dated that guy and thought that was love, then I need to have a reality check. So I think I was just ready to write it all off and give up because it is a lot of effort to be in a relationship and it's very vulnerable and being in love is very vulnerable. And so you don't want to get hurt again. And I was tired of being hurt by that point, especially with my parents' situation. And then my now husband comes into my life and I'm like, oh gosh, okay. Love makes no sense. I love this guy, even though I'm so scared of that I do love him, but I couldn't stop it. So
You were scared. What were you scared of exactly? I know we're kind of talking about all of this, maybe going back a little bit, but yeah, what scared you the most, maybe?
the first word that came to mind is rejection, just not getting into a relationship and marriage, which I believed and still believed at that time is permanent, and realizing, oh, this person doesn't love you and that you don't love this person. That was my personal nightmare. Because my parents, that was my parents' story. They liked each other, but they probably shouldn't have gotten married. They just weren't compatible. So I feared that.
100%. My mom shared at one point that this isn't maybe too much, but my mom shared at one point that, yeah, my dad and her didn't have the healthiest relationship. And I think they both would admit that at some level before they were married. And I think there were even people in their lives like telling them like, no,
Yeah.
like not a good idea.
Yes.
Don't do this. And for one reason or another, they just kind of pushed ahead, kind of fell their way into marriage. And yeah, and then it led to just a really unhealthy place, unfortunately. Yeah, no, there's so much to say on the relationship end. What about your husband made you believe that like a man could be different than everything you experienced before and that he could be faithful in particular?
He could apologize. Wow. I mean, that was huge. He could say, I'm sorry and mean it. That was a huge thing for me. He was upset when he made me upset. It wasn't all about him. We resolved our conflicts with words. All of that gave me hope that we could make a marriage work. And he just loved me. Like he cared about me. He cared about my family. He would go out of his way to do things for me. He drove an hour and 30 minutes like every week to visit me. So yeah. And he had good parents. Like that is so key. Cause I was like, I can't be in a relationship with someone else who has divorced parents. I know some people can do that, but I needed a guy from a good household and he was that. So that was nice too.
Yeah. No, I don't think you should feel guilty or anything about that. I know sometimes that could be a little triggering for people, but I think you know yourself and you knew that's what you needed. I have friends who both came from, divorced families and they've made it work and they've, from everything I could tell, a really beautiful marriage. Yeah. But I know others where they're like, nope, that is absolutely a requirement of mine. So I think that could be really wise. I love that what you said about your husband though. And I think, one of the most important decisions we can make, maybe let's spend some time here, is on choosing a spouse. And so one of the things that I like to say is you can tell kind of where someone's priorities are by how they spend their time and their money. And if they spend their time like and their money just on themselves, that's, I think, a red flag. But if they're doing that for others, like you said, your family, for you, I think it's a really good and beautiful thing. I love the fact that your husband is humble. That's a really beautiful quality I think people should look for, because on one level, as you know, it's the foundation of all the virtues. But it also, like you said so well, it gives you the ability to apologize, to admit when you're wrong, which I'm sure you've noticed, like it happens a lot within marriage. I certainly have noticed that. So yeah, I'm curious, like, was there a list of qualities you were adamant about in addition to wanting someone from, a healthy family? If you'd like to share your story with us, we'd love to hear it. You can do that in 3 easy steps. But first, some of the benefits of sharing your story. Reflecting on your story and sharing it with someone who can receive it with empathy is actually healing on a neurobiological level and makes your brain healthier, according to neurobiologists. Writing your story is also healing. Studies have shown that people who write about emotionally significant events in their lives are less depressed, they're less anxious, they're healthier, and they're happier. And finally, it can be really helpful to someone who's maybe on the same path that you're on, but a bit far behind you, to just hear your advice and to hear your story, since they're going through things that you've been through. And so if you want to share your story, just go to restoredministry.com. You can fill out the form on that page that will guide you in telling a short version of your story, and then we'll take that and turn it into an anonymous blog article. Again, if you want to share your story now, you can do so at restoredministry.com/story, or just by clicking the link in the show notes.
Your list of requirements gets shorter and shorter as you get older. I wanted someone who wanted children, smart, funny, ideally caring, gets along with my friends and family. That's very important. And he kind of fit all those boxes. And attractive to me. Doesn't necessarily mean attractive to everybody, but attractive to me. Ambitious. Oh, and I love music. That was a non-negotiable. I was like, so I need someone to love music with me. Otherwise, they're not going to understand me as a person. So, yeah.
Love that. No, I like kind of the mix of the objectives, like you got to have these, and then these like more subjective to you, but really important and still non-negotiables. That's really, really good. I did make the list of like the qualities I wanted, but I remember one of the things that really attracted me to my wife was just her selflessness. Kind of like your husband, I noticed that she just had a heart for other people. Like she's a nurse. And so clearly, like, her job literally requires her to care for others. She, was involved in like ministry at our college campus. So it was like this kind of obvious thing, like, yeah, she's clearly like time and money, like she's proof that she's putting it into that. So that was one of the things that really attracted me. What would you say to maybe a woman like you were at the time who maybe doesn't know what she wants to look for in a spouse? Like, obviously there's all these different qualities. What are some, what are maybe some of the big ones in addition to what we mentioned of like someone who's humble, can they admit that they're wrong? Like, what advice would you give on that? I'm curious.
I think the biggest thing for young women is you want to be with a guy who wants to be with you. It sounds so simple, but I can't think of how many times, if you have to ask yourself, what's he thinking about? Does he really want to hang out with me? Why isn't he answering this text message? He just might not be the one. He might not be actually into you. But I think women, we kind of like on some level crave that uncertainty, maybe. It's hard to describe, but if a man is not excited to see you, wanting to see you, sad when you leave, happy when you arrive, like you need to cut your losses, I think, and walk away. That's probably one of the big ones. And someone who shares your values. Don't waste your time with a guy who you don't agree with on the fundamentals, because in marriage, you don't want to spend your time arguing about the fundamentals. You want that to be something you're aligned on. So whether that's like kids, or are we going to homeschool, or what church are we going to go to? Like, those are big issues that you just don't want to fight about every day.
Right? No, marriage is hard enough as it is. Like, if you add those like big wedges between you, my goodness, I don't know how couples make it there. And if it's okay, I just wanted to throw in, in addition to those things you mentioned, what the researchers say is there's like kind of 5 big areas of life where you need to be on the same page. And you mentioned God, parenting, how you're going to raise your kids, how many kids you're going to have, or just an openness to life, money being another one, a healthy relationship with your in-laws, being able to set boundaries there, and then intimacy, especially sexual intimacy, before marriage, but even within marriage, like having boundaries there and having like a plan, being on the same page with what that looks like. And from what I've been told, if you're on the same page in those 5 areas, your chance of having a happy, successful marriage just shoots way up. So I love your advice. It's good. I want to transition a little bit, if that's okay. So you had mentioned that you struggled with, depression. There was a lot of anger, some suicidal ideation. But some of the things that, I think 2 of the things that stuck out to me the most in reading your story was the anger and the addiction. And so if it's okay, I wanted to go into those a little bit. Maybe let's start with the anger. You were angry at, your parents, at God. What were you angry about? And what did you learn to do with that anger?
I was angry about everything. Angry that my picture perfect life had been taken away. We had to sell my childhood home because divorce costs money, and it's so expensive. So we had to sell my childhood home and leave it and move into we were poor for many years, is basically what I'm trying to get at. And that was really, really hard, especially in my suburb that is kind of upper middle class, I would say. So I just felt shame, and that turned into anger. I was angry at my dad for thinking that he did nothing wrong. I think if we had a conversation today, I don't know how much self-reflection has happened. I hope more, but at the time he was convinced he did nothing wrong in the relationship. So that made me angry. I was angry at my mom for filing for divorce, even though on some level I knew it was justified. It was just very complex. And so I was just angry all the time. And I didn't really do anything with it until college. So it kind of just simmered and turned into bitterness and resentment and judgmental thoughts of others. And that kind of continued for years. So I did not handle it productively at the time.
I think that's a common experience. I know I experienced that too. I remember when, I learned the news that my parents were getting divorced. I just felt so much anger. Like I wanted the people involved to die. And I was an 11-year-old kid at the time, and it was just like so pent up. And then I think over time, I'm curious if you would agree with this. Yeah, we just learned to kind of hide it because we know that rocking the boat and adding more drama to an already dramatic situation is not probably going to help, at least in some situations. Some people do act out and kind of cry for attention in that way. But I think there's a lot of people who carry a lot of anger and they just like don't know what to do with it. Yeah, I'm curious, any further thoughts on that before we jump over to the addiction?
No, I wish I had an answer, a solution for people, but it is just hard sometimes.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think I remember hearing anger is the response to a real or perceived injustice.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so good there. And I think sometimes it's so confusing for people like us because the way that people talk about broken families and divorce, they don't really talk about the fact that there's an injustice going on there. That they talk about the fact that like, well, it's for the best. It's actually a good thing on some levels. Yeah.
I hate it's for the best so much.
Tell me more.
Oh my goodness. Every child of divorce knows that, it's better for your parents. Okay. It's for the best. It's better for you guys. No, it's not. No. It might be better in some ways, but there's a real loss. It's almost like a death, So every time I hear it's for the best, I nod politely, but I just move on. Yeah. It's very not triggering. I don't like that word, but just brings back memories to hear that.
No, 100%. And I think, sometimes as well-intentioned people, often I found as well-intentioned people trying to like console you or, I don't know, make sense of something that's painful. But yeah, I've found that was just so unhelpful and demeaning in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Like you said, you never walk into a funeral and be like, well, it's for the best.
It's best.
It's like, oh gosh, like that's dark. So no, I totally hear you there. And even in the cases which some people might be thinking of where it's necessary, it's truly necessary because of like real abuse and violence, things like that, the danger of death that happens in some situations. It's still a loss, like you said, because it's not the ideal it's supposed to be. And
right.
Even if it's the better of two really crappy options, it's still something that, I think deserve to be grieved. It's a serious loss, like you said.
Right.
The addiction. So as much as you want to share, what led you to it? How did that start? And what kept you coming back? Like what need was that filling?
So I was exposed to pornography when I was 11. A classmate had said the word lesbian and I had no idea what it meant. And so I went to Google. And I found out what lesbian meant very quickly. And what kept me coming back, I think, so I was sexually abused when I was younger by my grandfather. So I think that was part of it, trying to reconcile that. And what kept me coming back, I think it was just a coping mechanism for boredom, for rage, for sadness. It made me feel good about myself in the moment. Felt like I was doing something not harmful because society says it's not harmful. So I was engaging in my sexuality in a very twisted way, but it was the only way I could because of my traumatic background. I couldn't even hug people. Like it was bad. So I couldn't hug people, but behind closed doors, there was this horrible addiction that was happening. And after a certain point, you just come back because you're addicted. You don't even have a motivation. It just becomes part of your neural pathways. So that probably happened pretty quickly. But yeah, broken home plus abuse plus, just trying to find an escape.
Yeah. Okay. 100%. And I was exposed at the same age, and no, my heart breaks for you too with the abuse. I'm so sorry for that. I'm curious. So you're 11. That lasts into high school, I imagine. And was there a low point that you hit where you were just kind of ready to give up, or you hit rock bottom and realized, my goodness, this is controlling my life?
Yeah, I think I always knew I had a problem, but I think I had given up on trying to fix it. I basically threw up my hands and said, this addiction's going to be with me for my whole life, so why bother trying to fight it? It was only in meeting my now husband and eventually converting to Catholicism that I realized, oh, this is a sin and I need to get rid of it. So I had no plan, though, to get rid of it. I had no idea what to do. So I started culling off sources of my addiction, and that helped a little bit. But the only thing so I would delete apps that were pathways to that addiction. I had a bunch of notes that had explicit content on them, so I would delete those. So I started paring back, but as people who are addicted know that there's always a way to get back to what you want to do. So really what solved it was basically a Hail Mary prayer of God, I can't do this alone. I can't figure this out. Help me. And I would call this a miracle because I have no other explanation for it. But when I converted in 2021, I put down pornography and never picked it up again. So after I had the Blessed Sacrament for the first time, I just stopped watching pornography wholesale. And I know that might not be relatable for some people and might be hard to hear for others because they want that miracle for themselves. But for me, it was just grace.
It's beautiful. So over 5 years, or about 5 years.
It was a decade. It was a decade of addiction straight.
Yeah. Okay. So it lasted, but then you've been free since that time. Beautiful. Yeah. And you don't have to go into this, but I know, to anyone listening, I think one of the most tempting things when you find freedom is if you ever were to fall back, it can be extremely demoralizing. Something like, oh, well, I've fallen there, then there's no hope for me. But just anyone who maybe finds himself in that situation, I just want to say there's so much hope. And even in that situation where you've maybe broken free and you fall back, that you can find freedom again. And would you say anything else to someone listening right now who maybe either is stuck in their kind of initial addiction or maybe did have a relapse and feels all the shame?
I would say that shame is not super helpful in changing your behavior. A little guilt can be good to have you come back to Jesus and apologize, but shame just keeps you in that spiral. Seek help. I know for women, it's especially hard because we think this is a very male sin. There's a lot of resources for men, and women don't get talked about nearly enough with this sin, but Magdala Ministries is wonderful, and they have small groups for women who are struggling with the same thing, so I highly recommend them. So yeah, there's hope out there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Love Magdala. And we'll link to some of the podcast episodes we've done on this topic for both men and women, because it's a human problem. Like you said, it's not just a male or female problem. And I think it's one of the things Autumn I learned from Jay Stringer. Have you read any of Jay Stringer's content? Oh man, it's so good. So Jay Stringer is a therapist who kind of specializes in this area of sexual compulsion and addiction. And his first book, he studied about 4,000 men and women who struggled with sexual compulsions or addictions. We're talking like porn use, masturbation, infidelity. And one of the wild things he found was that the type of trauma someone endured could be predicted by their porn searches and sexual fantasies.
Wow.
And in other words, there was this whole mosaic, there's this whole pattern to it that they realized none of this is random. And so I think what happens with so many of us who've struggled in this area is that we think well, we're the only one. We think that no one could relate. We think that, there's no hope for us. When in reality, it's actually it's super common for people from broken families to struggle with this. Dr. Patrick Carnes, I've said this on the podcast before, Dr. Patrick Carnes, another expert in this area of sexual compulsion, he found that 87% of people with a sex addiction come from a broken family.
I believe
it. 9 out of 10. So it's if you are dealing with this and your family was really dysfunctional, broken, parents got divorced, it's makes sense. And so I think there's a lot of freedom to, to hearing that, wow, it's actually predictable and it's likely, but thankfully you don't have to stay there. And that's where some of those resources that we'll mention or that we'll link to in the show notes will can be incredibly helpful. I do believe that freedom is possible. What Jay Stringer basically says is like our path to freedom is actually through the specific sexual struggles that we have. It's not sometimes we want to like shy away from them. They're bad, they're dirty, they're shameful. But he says, no, you actually need to learn to listen to your lust. He's not suggesting that we fall into lust. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying basically it's just a symptom. It's just like pinpoints where deeper healing is needed. So not to go on a whole rant, but I found it, really helpful, and a lot of people like us have as well. So we'll link to all that in the show notes. Jay came on to talk about that book. But is there anything that you would add to any of that?
Yeah, I think I would just treat your addiction with curiosity instead of revulsion. So porn satisfies a need. You just have to figure out what that need is for you. So if it's connection, if it's love, if it's acceptance, if it's a self-esteem boost, that's all good to know. So you can find those good things elsewhere. So just be curious about your addiction. Don't be afraid of it. That's where the devil wants to keep you, I think, is fear and shame. And yeah, that's all I'll say.
For countless teens and young adults, their parents' divorce is actually the most traumatic thing that they've experienced, but so many feel lost and alone in navigating the challenges. I've been there myself. It's really not easy, and it shouldn't be this way. My book, It's Not Your Fault, guides them through those challenges by helping them put their pain into words and begin to heal, work through the emotional problems that they face, cope in healthy ways instead of falling into bad habits, improve their relationship with their parents, navigate the holidays and other life events, and build healthy relationships, and so much more. One Amazon review said this book is packed full of really practical help. If you come from a broken family, or even if you don't, but you love someone that does, this book is so helpful. I can't recommend this enough. By the way, it's a quick read, and it doesn't need to be read cover to cover. Since it's in question and answer format, you can just read one of the questions and one of the answers. And so if you want to join the thousands of people who've gotten a copy, just go to restoredministry.com/books to get the book, or download the free chapters. Again, that's restoredministry.com/books, or just click the link in the show notes. So good. And one final thing that just came to mind was just how porn in particular can be a super stimulant, similar to like a street drug, to the point where you are going to have to go through a period of withdrawal. And so it's going to be like really difficult. And the habit you created, like you said, is going to just want to pull you back again and again. And so that's where I think there's so much wisdom in what you said about like, just don't do it alone.
Yeah.
It's such a fool's errand to try. And you'll look up years later and be like, well, haven't made any progress, even though I wanted to save my pride and not ask for help.
Right.
Was there anything else in terms of like struggles with emotions or habits that you wanted to mention that, was part of your story that we haven't touched on?
I think we mentioned all the big ones, like the acting out sexually and then the judgment and rage against other people. But that was all kind of part and parcel of what made Autumn. So
Yeah. Maybe let's go back to the anger for a second there. Was there any other shift in you that helped you deal with the anger toward particular people? Was there anything you learned or a transformational moment that helped you realize that maybe the anger is normal to feel, but what do you do with that?
I think part of it is just healed by time. Distance from the events helped. Like I went to college and was away from my parents and wasn't in their house anymore. So that kind of was a good healing distance for me. And then seeing my younger brother this is probably one of the saddest parts of my story, I think, but my younger brother, 6 years younger than me, and he couldn't escape the court system. So he was having to go back and forth between my mother and my father's house. And at the time, he was so young, he couldn't understand why I was angry at my father. So he was angry at me for not coming to the house with them and hanging out with dad all buddy-buddy. Seeing him get older and progressively get more angry at my father for what he had done was devastating, but seeing him feel that rage helped cool my rage, if that makes sense. Like I had to be his like oracle in the desert when he was needing to go to someone who understood. We couldn't both be angry. It wouldn't be productive. So I had to process my emotions, journal it out, talk to friends and family, and so I could be there for him. So I think that helped me turn down the temperature a little bit, was seeing his struggle.
Be kind of a counterweight to his anger. Okay, that makes so much sense. You mentioned writing has been helpful for you. You're a great writer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, you are. I was really impressed with your writing ability. Yeah, talk more about that. How has that helped you heal and kind of process your emotions?
I think journaling is really good for some people, myself included, just to get out the things that you probably shouldn't say. My mouth gets me in trouble most often, so I think journaling is good for me. So I just wrote down every emotion I was feeling just to get it out, because if I kept it in, I would just get really depressed. So that was helpful for me, is just writing and channeling that energy into something creative. That could be painting for you, or running, or like working out really hard, or some other mentally stimulating activity to make sure you don't unleash that on your friends. But that journaling was not for me.
Cool. Beautiful. Writing has been really helpful for me. A friend of mine told me recently that people who've endured traumatic events in their lives are more likely to get into endurance sports.
Okay.
So I don't know the psychology behind it, but it kind of made sense to me. Like you said, like that could be a good outlet in a lot of ways. And I've definitely found that moving your body is incredibly helpful as well. Good stuff. You said you kind of escape the court system.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to do the visitation similar to at least your younger brother, right? And so I remember you saying that you felt really conflicted in that, though, that your brothers were going to be with dad, but you, out of self-protection, just knew you couldn't do that. Yeah, why did you feel so conflicted? And talk me through where you were at that point.
I mean, I still don't know if I made the right choice sometimes. Basically, my older brother has autism, so he's not, fully aware of everything that happens. And my younger brother was so much younger, and my dad was bringing his girlfriends to the house and things like that. And you already know where this is going. So they were mean to my brothers, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was the only one who saw what my dad was doing, if that makes sense, saw through all the BS and was watching him to make sure he was on good behavior. And I think he knew that, which is why he accepted me not wanting to come to his house, because it served his benefits. So I didn't go because I wanted to be a source of positivity for my brothers. And I tried going back and forth a couple of times, and it was just incredibly damaging to my mental health. And I was like, I need to be alive for them. So that's more important than me being there in this case. It's still tough, though. I mean, I don't know if you have siblings, but this is really hard, a really hard choice to make, I think.
So hard. Yeah. No, I remember feeling guilty as well when I got to the point where I didn't have to do that stuff, and they still had to. And gosh, it's the worst, especially when things are unstable, tumultuous, and they might be in a situation which happened. It did happen where it's like, my goodness, I wish I was there. You mentioned just this desire to not live anymore, to give up. What happened there?
I don't know. I think part of it was a hormonal thing that's common for women, is once you start your menstrual period, your emotions just kind of are up and down for a few years. So that didn't help, because that's exactly when my parents decided to get divorced. Not good. So I think part of it was hormonal. Part of it was just, I don't know. It felt like death, basically. I think it says this in the literature, but sometimes a parent dying is actually better than a divorce, because your parent can die and still be this paragon of virtue for you. You can still miss them. You can still talk about them lovingly. Whereas divorce is just more complex. So it felt like a death on steroids. So I just didn't see a way forward for me to be happy. I thought, well, I'm just going to end up like them. I'm going to be this bitter person for the rest of my life and be angry, and who's going to want to deal with that? So I think all that together just made me not want to do life anymore.
No, I hear you. And was it just your brothers who kind of kept you from going there, or were there other forces as well?
Thankfully, I was baptized when I was 9, so I think that was part of it. It was the Holy Spirit just withholding my hand, but I never had a concrete plan. I was just tired. I didn't have an active will to die, but I didn't have an active will to live. But I had friends, which is key. I had friends that were from whole families and people who cared about me and would notice if I was gone. So I couldn't play that game of, well, no one would care. I knew that was a lie. So for their sake, I stayed alive.
It's a heart-wrenching place to be. And I've sat with people close to me who are at that point, and yeah, you could just tell, like you said it so perfectly, the look in their eyes. It's like they don't necessarily want to die, but they just don't want to live with, the pain they're going through. And it's an understandable place to be. And so it's beautiful that you were able to pull out of that. And I definitely can see the impact of grace and all of that, but really beautiful. What did you learn from your friends and their families that were healthy that maybe helped you get to a healthier place and even build your own marriage? Huh?
I think I've had the luck to have exposure to a lot of wonderful father figures. So it proved to me that there were good men and that they loved their wives and could love their wives. So that was helpful for me believing that could be possible for someone like me. And then I learned from my friends, this was a harder lesson to learn, but eventually they were like, Autumn, you can't trauma dump on us anymore. And I was like, wow. At first I was hurt. I was so hurt by that. But over time I was like, you know what? They're right. Like me rehashing this over and over again is not making it better. I need to like do something with this pain. So that's how you know you have a real friend, when they're like, hey, enough. We love you, but enough. So that was good for me to learn to not make the divorce and my trauma from it my whole personality. Like there were other parts of me that were important, and not just that my parents hated each other. So
Totally. No, and I think it's even something I worry a lot about hosting this podcast and running this like ministry or nonprofit behind it. It's like even the term child of divorce, I've said this before, I like don't really like, because it's just meant to describe an experience you had, not become an identity. And I think sometimes we like take it on as an identity. So you said you were able to kind of look beyond that and move through it. I know we're going to get to this shortly, but I'm curious, like, where did you go with your trauma and your pain, if not to your friends?
Journaling continued to help. And then really diving into philosophy and faith helped me. Thinking about thinking, finding good answers to the problem of evil. That was huge for me, because the problem of evil was my life. Like, why would a good God let this happen to me? And so philosophy and reading C.S. Lewis and reading really good authors like that helped me process mentally and intellectually that evil does not mean there is not a good God. Evil does not mean that you deserve it. Those kinds of things. So I think philosophy helped a lot for me personally.
Beautiful. No, why do you think that worked so well? I mean, in addition to like the problem of pain and evil, like that's huge, obviously, to figure that out, or to come to the realization that there can be a good God and still have suffering in our lives. But yeah, why did that help? I'm really curious.
I think it broke me out of my like mental prison a little bit. Like thinking about thinking is good for you. It's like math for your brain. So instead of thinking about my pain and how sad I was about myself and how everyone else sucked and all this stuff, I could direct all of that energy into thinking about higher things than myself. So it took me out of my own mental prison here. So I think that was a good thing for me.
Yeah. Okay. Expanded your kind of small world to
Yeah.
the bigger world. I love that. A mentor challenged me in a similar way. He challenged me to find someone who was lonelier and struggling more than me, and just help them, like love them. And that was really kind of eye-opening, realizing like, what, there are people who are struggling more than me. And so I think it helped me realize that, my pain wasn't the only pain in the world. And even amidst the pain, you can still do good. You can still choose to love and help people. So I can definitely relate with you a lot on that. So we're almost to the end of our time together. I was curious, just want to touch briefly on your relationship with your parents. So you said that you got to a point where, even given all the hurt and anger that you felt toward your father, you were able to forgive him. What motivated you to actually forgive him? A lot of people don't go that route. They hold on to the unforgiveness. What motivated you to forgive him? And maybe what were some of the practical things you did to actually forgive him?
I think forgiveness is more for me, like holding on to that poison. I've heard it said that like unforgiveness is holding on to poison and expecting the other person to die. And it's true. Like it was ruining my life, being that resentful and angry all the time. And I was ready to move on. It had been years since the events took place. And I knew my dad and I were probably never going to agree on what happened. So there was really no point in rehashing it. It would just be like banging my head against the wall. So I could either accept both my parents, frankly, as they were, and not expect them to be the perfect parents that I probably would never have. It's kind of sad, but it's also like you have to accept what you were given a little bit and look for father figures elsewhere and in the church and in your families and friends, because sometimes you're not going to get what you want. Practically, how did I forgive him? I wrote a letter forgiving him just for me. And over time, I slowly, opened myself up to conversations with him again. Now that took years. So, don't rush yourself if you don't feel ready. But I chose to invite him to my wedding, even though my therapist at the time said it was a terrible idea. Once my daughter was born, his granddaughter, I told him I was pregnant. I allowed him to send me gifts for the baby. invited him to her baptism, events that had other people. So it wasn't so intense, like just one-on-one with him, because that always made me nervous, still does. But if there was an event with other people, I figured, how can I include him in my life, even if it's at a healthy distance? So that's basically what I've done. And I think it's been fruitful. And I also use it as an evangelization opportunity. He's not Catholic, so I feel like every time we see each other, I'm like, hey, have you considered the church? So yeah.
You love him. Like, even if there's, with those boundaries, like, which love requires health boundaries. So I love that. Well, it's been so good talking to you. I had two final questions. One, how is your life better now? Give us a little bit of a contrast. We kind of went through a lot of the muck and a lot of the hard times you've been through, but tell me the good things about your life. How is your life better now that you've found a lot of healing and growth?
Oh my goodness, my life's completely different. Like, my marriage is wonderful. We have a little house together in the kind of rural countryside. It's wonderful. I have a daughter who's amazing and just inspires me every day to be a child again with her. My relationship with my in-laws is good. My relationship with my mom is pretty good, all things considered. My relationship with my dad's getting better. I'm writing. I have a job I like. It's completely different. Like, I just don't hold all that negative emotion in my head anymore. And I take myself lightly a little bit nowadays, which is good.
So good. Adam, so good to speak with you. Really grateful for you sharing your story and being so vulnerable. I know it's going to help a lot of people. I want to give you the final word. What maybe final advice or encouragement would you offer to maybe the younger you listening right now, especially if they fear becoming like their parents, maybe repeating their parents' story in their own life? What final encouragement or advice would you give?
There are tools out there that can help you not become like your parents. However, your parents are still within you, and there are good things about your parents, even if it's hard to see that right now. But you are the good things about your parents. You are. So you can take those good things and maximize them and minimize the bad things. And that's your choice. There's a lot of tools out there. There's ministries like this to help you kind of cope with the trauma from this event in your life. There's friends you can have. Beautiful relationships are possible. Just all things are possible with God and with an openness to good things. It won't always be this bad. And if it is this bad for a long time, God's always with you in that as well.
That wraps up this episode. If this podcast has helped you, feel free to subscribe and rate or review the show. You'll avoid missing future episodes and help us reach more people too. In closing, always remember you are not doomed to repeat your family's dysfunction. You can break that cycle and build a better life. And we are here to help. And keep in mind the words of C.S. Lewis, who said, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending.